The quiet look. The night was warm in downtown Los Angeles, yet a quiet tension seemed to float above the crowd waiting outside the charity gala hall. Cameras flashed, voices buzzed, and soft music leaked from the open doors. Keanu Reeves arrived without any entourage, wearing a plain black suit that almost blended into the night. He held a small paper bag instead of a luxury gift box, a detail that some noticed but most ignored. Sandra Bullock, inside the hall already, had been laughing politely at small talk, but her eyes kept glancing at the entrance as if she felt something was about to shift. The gala was supposed to be ordinary, an event to raise funds for a children's hospital. But the room was thick with unspoken rivalries, wealthy donors quietly competing for praise, reporters waiting for drama, and actors weighing every word to protect their image. Sandra had been here many times before, yet tonight something felt different. She could not place why her chest tightened when she saw the modest paper bag in Keanu's hand as he stepped through the doorway. In the first 5 minutes, a whisper of conflict rippled through the room. A famous producer, known for his arrogance, made a cruel joke about an elderly janitor accidentally knocking over a tray of drinks. The laughter that followed was sharp, almost cutting. Sandra winced, but she stayed silent. She knew how quickly kindness could be mocked in a place like this. Then she noticed Keanu's eyes, calm, steady, and watching. He did not laugh. Instead, he quietly walked toward the janitor, bent down, and helped pick up the broken glasses. He whispered something that made the janitor smile through his embarrassment. The cameras missed it. Most people missed it. But Sandra saw every detail. Keanu returned to his seat without fanfare, his paper bag now resting beside his chair. Sandra's curiosity grew. She had known him for years, through blockbuster films and long shoots, but there was always a quiet mystery about him. Tonight, the mystery felt heavier, almost urgent. She excused herself from a circle of donors and walked over. "What's in the bag?" she asked, trying to sound casual. He gave a small, almost shy smile. "Just something that belongs to someone else," he said. No further explanation. Minutes later, the gala's host announced a surprise auction. Rare memorabilia from famous films donated by celebrities. Laughter, applause, and competitive bidding filled the hall. Then a child's soft cry interrupted the moment. At the far side of the room, a young boy in a wheelchair had dropped a small sketchbook. It landed near the producer who had mocked the janitor. The producer picked it up, smirked, and flipped through the pages, making another cruel remark. A hush fell over the tables. Sandra felt her stomach twist. She opened her mouth to speak, but hesitated. Before she could act, Keanu stood. He didn't shout. He didn't glare. He simply walked over, took the sketchbook gently, and knelt beside the boy. He returned the book with both hands, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Then he looked back at the producer. No anger, no challenge, just a quiet look so full of disappointment and silent strength that the entire hall seemed to hold its breath. The producer's smirk faltered. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Sandra felt tears sting her eyes without warning. The boy opened his sketchbook to show Keanu a drawing. A superhero with dark hair and a gentle smile saving people during a storm. "It's you," the boy whispered. Keanu's lips curved into a soft, humble smile. "It looks better than me," he said quietly. His voice carried even in its softness, and somehow the room seemed less cold. Sandra felt something break inside her, a reminder that kindness could still cut through vanity and noise. The rest of the evening unfolded with subtle tension. Sandra watched Keanu slip away from the spotlight, greeting staff members instead of reporters. He placed the paper bag under the stage and whispered to a stagehand. No one else noticed. When the final speech ended and applause echoed, the stagehand quietly brought out the bag. Inside was an old camera, scuffed and worn, with a child's name scratched on the back. Keanu explained in a low voice that carried just enough that years ago, a boy from the hospital had lost this camera during a storm. Tonight, Keanu had tracked it down and returned it. Not for applause, not for credit, but for the boy's memories. Sandra's heart ached. She stepped closer, catching Keanu's eye. That quiet look again, steady, gentle, full of unspoken stories, hit her harder than any words could. She felt tears roll down her cheeks. In that silent exchange, she understood. Sometimes the smallest, quietest actions carry the greatest weight. The crowd began to disperse, but Sandra stayed, wiping her tears and watching the man whose quiet kindness had shifted the entire night without a single loud word. Whispers in the hallway. The gala had ended, but the weight of Keanu's quiet gesture lingered like a soft echo. Outside, Los Angeles glowed under a thin veil of mist, neon lights shimmering on wet pavement. Sandra Bullock stepped out into the cool night air, her eyes still damp. She thought she would find Keanu already gone, disappearing like he often did after events. But through the glass doors of a side hallway, she caught a glimpse of him, alone, speaking with the elderly janitor he had helped earlier. The janitor's hands trembled slightly as he held the broom, yet his shoulders were straighter now. Something about the way Keanu listened, fully, without glancing at his phone or the door, pulled Sandra closer. She stopped just outside the doorway, hidden by shadows, and watched. The janitor spoke about losing his home in a recent flood, about working double shifts to send his granddaughter to school. Keanu didn't interrupt, didn't offer a solution right away. He simply nodded, his gaze steady, his expression soft. When the man's voice cracked, Keanu placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You've held more storms than most people could survive," he said quietly. The janitor's lips trembled, and for a moment the world outside, the cameras, the noise, the vanity, seemed far away. Sandra felt her breath hitch. She had spent years around fame and applause, but this was different. It wasn't a grand gesture or a scripted moment for the press. It was a simple, raw act of respect. She stepped back, worried she was intruding, but the movement caused a faint squeak of her heel on the tile. Keanu turned his head slightly, caught her eye, and offered a small, knowing smile. It wasn't an invitation to join, nor a dismissal. It was an acknowledgement, as if to say, "I see you," and that's enough. Later, as the crowd thinned outside, Sandra found herself walking alongside Keanu toward the parking lot. The city hummed softly in the distance. "You could have said something to that producer," she said. Called him out. "Embarrassed him?" Keanu shrugged lightly. "Sometimes quiet is louder than noise," he replied. There was no arrogance in his voice, only a gentle certainty. Sandra glanced at him, realizing that his way of navigating the world was so different from most. He didn't force kindness into the spotlight. He let it bloom quietly where it mattered. As they reached the edge of the lot, a small commotion broke out near the street. A woman stood beside a broken-down car, her young daughter clutching her hand. A group of people walked past without stopping. Keanu slowed, his brow furrowing. Without hesitation, he approached the woman. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. The woman explained her car had died and her phone battery was dead. Before Sandra could even process it, Keanu knelt beside the car, checked under the hood, and flagged down a rideshare driver to take the mother and child home. When the driver arrived, the woman whispered, "I can't pay for this." Keanu slipped a bill into her hand. "Then pay it forward someday," he said with a warm smile. Sandra watched the little girl's eyes widen. She realized how often people walk past small crises, convinced they're too small to matter. Keanu made even the smallest storm feel seen. As the car drove away, Sandra whispered, "Do you ever get tired of giving?" Keanu glanced at the night sky for a long moment before replying, "No, because giving is the only thing that doesn't take from me." The drive back to Sandra's neighborhood was quiet, but inside her chest, thoughts were loud. Flashes of old memories surfaced. Times she had felt alone on set, moments when criticism had cut too deep, nights when kindness from unexpected places had saved her spirit. She looked at Keanu's profile in the dim streetlights and felt a strange mix of gratitude and curiosity. What had shaped him this way? What storms had he endured silently? At a red light, Keanu noticed a homeless man sitting by a shuttered store, shivering under a thin blanket. The world outside the car seemed to slow. Without a word, Keanu pulled over, grabbed the paper bag from the gala's table, the one he had used to carry the camera, and stepped out. Sandra watched him kneel beside the man, handing him half of the food from the gala and the thick scarf from around his own neck. The man's eyes filled with tears. Keanu didn't wait for thanks. He returned to the car, closed the door quietly and offered Sandra a small smile, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But to Sandra, everything extraordinary had just unfolded. As they continued driving, she realized this was more than an evening of charity. This was a pattern, a way of living. Every quiet look, every small action carried an unseen story. She could feel a stirring deep in her chest, a mix of respect, sadness for the world's harshness, and a fragile hope that maybe kindness still had power. By the time they reached her driveway, the night had grown even quieter. Sandra turned to him, searching for words that didn't sound cliché. "You changed tonight," she whispered. "Or maybe you changed me." Keanu gave her that same soft smile, the one that had silenced a room hours earlier. "Maybe we all just need reminders," he said. As Keanu's car disappeared down the street, Sandra stood in the soft glow of her porch light, holding back tears again. Somewhere between the gala's noise and the broken-down car, between the janitor's cracked voice and the homeless man's grateful eyes, she had begun to feel something shifting inside her. She didn't know what the next day would bring, but she knew one thing for sure. The quiet look she had seen tonight would follow her for a long time. And deep down, she suspected the night's events were only the beginning of a story much bigger than either of them realized. Echoes of a promise. The next morning, Los Angeles was bathed in golden sunlight. But for Sandra Bullock, the glow felt different. She woke up with the memory of Keanu's quiet look pressed against her thoughts. She sat by her kitchen window, sipping tea, but her mind wasn't on her schedule or her phone. She kept replaying his words. Maybe we all just need reminders. She wondered if she had become one of those people who forgot to notice small acts of kindness. Her fame, her busy life, it all seemed loud compared to the gentle silence of Keanu's way. She checked her messages and found a short note from an unknown number. It read, "There's a children's art exhibit at the hospital today. Come if you can. No cameras." She didn't need to guess who sent it. Curiosity and something deeper pulled her to cancel her morning plans. She wore a simple sweater and jeans, tied her hair back, and slipped out without alerting the press. When she arrived at the hospital's small community room, she found Keanu sitting cross-legged on the floor with a circle of children. He wasn't telling them stories of movie sets or showing them autographs. Instead, he was listening. A boy with a scar on his cheek was explaining the meaning of his drawing. A tall tree sheltering small animals from the rain. Keanu looked at the drawing as if it were a priceless painting. Sandra leaned against the doorway, unseen for a moment, and felt her heart soften. A nurse whispered beside her, "He's been coming here for years, never wants credit." The words hit her with quiet force. Sandra stepped into the room and a little girl recognized her immediately. "Are you the lady from the movies?" the girl asked. Sandra knelt down, smiled, and nodded. The children crowded closer, their laughter filling the room. But Sandra's eyes kept flicking toward Keanu. He met her gaze with a gentle smile that spoke volumes. No need for grand gestures, no need for noise, just presence. Later, as the children's parents arrived, a commotion arose in the hallway. A volunteer rushed in, breathless. "One of the elevators is stuck," she said. "There's a boy inside. He's panicking." Before anyone could move, Keanu was already walking swiftly toward the elevator bank. Sandra followed. The elevator doors were jammed slightly open, and inside a small boy cried out. Keanu crouched down by the gap, his voice calm. "Hey, buddy, you're safe. Can you hear me?" The boy sniffled and nodded. "I'm scared," he whispered. Keanu told him a quiet story about a brave astronaut who once got stuck in a capsule but waited patiently for help, and how sometimes bravery isn't loud. It's the quiet way we hold on. A maintenance worker arrived to open the doors, and the boy stepped out into Keanu's arms. The child clung to him tightly, his small hands gripping Keanu's jacket. Sandra's throat tightened as she watched. In that moment, the crowded world outside the hospital faded. Only the boy's relief and Keanu's calm mattered. When the boy's mother arrived in tears, Keanu gently placed the child in her arms and stepped back, blending into the background as if he didn't want recognition. Outside, Sandra caught up with him. "You didn't even wait for her to thank you," she said. He smiled faintly. "Kindness isn't a receipt you collect," he replied. The simplicity of his words cut through her, leaving her silent. That afternoon, Sandra convinced Keanu to stop for coffee at a quiet cafe near the hospital. They chose a corner table away from the crowd. The cafe smelled of fresh bread and roasted beans, a comforting hum of normal life. As they sipped their drinks, Sandra asked, "Why do you hide so much of what you do?" Keanu looked out the window at a stray cat stretching in the sunlight. "Because real kindness doesn't need a spotlight," he said. "And because once, someone did the same for me." His voice softened as he told her about a time years ago when he was a struggling actor, grieving losses the world didn't know about. On a night when he felt completely alone, a stranger, a woman with silver hair, had given him a meal, a blanket, and a quiet reminder that storms pass. "She didn't ask for my name," he said. "She just said, 'Keep going. The world still needs your light.' I promised myself I'd return that light, even if no one noticed." As he spoke, Sandra felt her eyes sting again. She thought of the janitor, the homeless man, the broken-down car, and the elevator boy. All those moments weren't random. They were echoes of a promise Keanu had made long ago. As they left the cafe, a sudden downpour drenched the street. People ran for shelter, but Keanu laughed softly, unbothered. He offered Sandra his jacket, holding it over her head. The gesture was simple, but in the gray rain it felt like a small act of grace. They stood under a narrow awning, water streaming around their feet. Sandra looked at him, her hair damp, her heart unexpectedly full. "You make it hard not to believe in good things," she said quietly. Keanu's quiet look, the same one from the gala, returned. It said more than words ever could. As the rain eased, a small boy from the hospital ran past them, waving his sketchbook. On the cover was a new drawing, 2 figures standing under an umbrella, light spilling from their smiles. Sandra realized the boy had seen them through the cafe window. She and Keanu shared a soft laugh, and for a fleeting moment the world seemed lighter, as if the storm itself had paused to watch. Later that night, Sandra sat in her living room, the city lights flickering through her window. She scrolled through her phone but couldn't focus on anything. The quiet moments replayed in her mind. The elevator story, the cafe confession, the rain-soaked jacket. She realized this wasn't just about Keanu. It was about the hidden kindness all around her. The small sparks that could still warm a world that often felt cold. And as she drifted off to sleep, she whispered to herself, "Maybe reminders really are everywhere if we just look." The letter under the door. The following morning, Sandra Bullock woke to the faint sound of a letter sliding under her front door. At first, she thought it was a mistake. No one sent letters anymore. When she bent to pick it up, she noticed her name handwritten on the envelope in small, neat letters. There was no return address. Inside was a folded piece of paper with only a short message. "Meet me at Willow Park at noon. Bring nothing but time." There was no signature, but she knew. Something about the calm tone, the restraint in the handwriting. It was Keanu. As she drove to the park, Sandra's thoughts spun with questions. The city outside was alive with horns and chatter, but inside her car, it felt like the world was holding its breath. She arrived early and sat on a bench beneath a tall willow tree, its branches swaying gently in the breeze. Children played in the distance, their laughter carrying through the air. At noon sharp, Keanu appeared, walking with that unhurried pace of his, a paper bag once again in his hand. He sat beside her without speaking for a long moment, letting the sound of the park fill the silence. Finally, he said quietly, "There's someone you need to meet." Sandra tilted her head, intrigued. Keanu nodded toward a young woman approaching from a nearby path. She wore a hospital badge clipped to her sweater and carried a worn leather journal. Her eyes were kind but tired. She introduced herself as Maya, a nurse from the children's hospital. "Keanu told me you'd understand," she said. Maya opened the journal and flipped to a page covered in colorful crayon drawings. A boy smiling, a tree, a camera. "This was Samuel's book," she said, her voice catching. "He was the boy whose camera Keanu returned. What no one knows is that Samuel passed away 2 years ago. He always dreamed someone would tell his story, not as a tragedy, but as a reminder of kindness." Sandra felt her throat tighten. Maya continued. Keanu never told anyone, but he's been helping families like ours quietly for years. When my own son needed surgery, an anonymous donor paid for it. I found out later it was him. Keanu shifted uncomfortably, as if he didn't want credit. Sandra's eyes glistened as she looked at him. She thought of all the headlines about scandals, fame, and egos. None of those stories felt as heavy as this silent truth sitting beside her. Why not let the world know? She asked softly. Keanu's gaze rested on the children playing in the park. Because the world doesn't need another celebrity hero. It needs ordinary people to believe they can be heroes too. Before Sandra could respond, a sudden commotion erupted near the playground. A small boy had climbed too high on the jungle gym and slipped, dangling by one hand as other children screamed. Parents rushed forward but froze, unsure how to help. Keanu was already moving. In seconds, he was beneath the boy, speaking calmly. You're safe. I've got you. He climbed up carefully, secured the boy, and guided him down. The child's mother sobbed with relief, hugging her son tightly. Keanu stepped back quietly, brushing dirt from his jacket, avoiding the small crowd gathering around. Sandra stood frozen, her heart racing from the sudden adrenaline, but also struck again by the way he handled crisis, with gentleness and quiet resolve. After the playground cleared, Keanu led Sandra and Maya to a small wooden bridge that crossed a stream at the edge of the park. He opened the paper bag and took out 2 sandwiches, offering one to Sandra and one to Maya. It was such a humble gesture that it made Sandra smile through her tears. They stood there, eating in silence, the willow branches swaying overhead. Birds chirped softly. For a moment, the world felt healed. Maya then shared a memory. Samuel used to draw stars on every page, she said. He believed stars were the promises we make when no one's looking. I think that's what Keanu is, someone's promise turned into a person. Sandra felt a lump in her throat. She glanced at Keanu, but he looked away, embarrassed by the praise. She thought of all the times people had praised her for performances, for box office numbers, for style. None of that ever felt as real as this quiet scene on a wooden bridge. As the afternoon light shifted, Keanu finally spoke. There's something I need to tell you, Sandra. Tonight I'm going back to the hospital. There's a special room there, a place Samuel built with his drawings before he passed. I promised him I'd keep it alive. But I think it's time the world saw it, not for me, but for all the kids who believe kindness still matters. His voice was steady, but Sandra sensed a flicker of vulnerability. I want you to come, he added. That evening, under a sky streaked with pink and gold, they returned to the hospital. Maya unlocked a small door at the end of a quiet corridor. Inside was a room glowing with string lights and walls covered in children's art. Paper stars hung from the ceiling. In the center, on a small pedestal, was a simple wooden box with Samuel's name carved into it. The room felt sacred, not because of religion or ceremony, but because it held pure human hope. Sandra walked among the drawings, her fingers tracing the edges of paper stars. She felt tears prick her eyes again. Keanu stood silently near the door, giving her space. Finally, she turned to him. This is what the world needs to see, she whispered. Keanu's quiet look met hers, and for a heartbeat, the weight of every noisy headline outside these walls seemed to fade. Here, in this small glowing room, kindness was enough. As they left the hospital, Sandra glanced at Keanu under the soft glow of the parking lot lights. Do you ever wonder if the world will really change? She asked. He paused, then smiled faintly. Maybe not all at once, he said. But maybe it changes a little every time someone sees a quiet look and remembers what it feels like. That night, Sandra lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She thought of Samuel's stars, Maya's story, the boy on the jungle gym, and the way Keanu had carried so many promises without ever asking for credit. She felt a shift deep in her chest, a new kind of resolve. Tomorrow, she decided she wouldn't just admire kindness, she would act on it. And for the first time in a long while, she fell asleep, smiling. Storms and small miracles, the next day began with a soft drizzle over Los Angeles. But by mid-afternoon, the clouds had thickened, and the sky darkened to a heavy gray. Sandra Bullock sat by her window, the sound of raindrops tapping like a quiet drumbeat on the glass. Her mind replayed the hospital room filled with Samuel's stars, the wooden box carved with his name, and Keanu's words about small changes. She could not shake the feeling that today might test those words. Storms had a way of revealing what was fragile and what was strong. By evening, the rain had turned into a relentless downpour. Streets flooded quickly, traffic stalled, and local news anchors warned of flash floods in low-lying areas. Sandra's phone buzzed. It was a message from Maya. "Power is out at the hospital. Some kids are scared. We need help." Without hesitation, Sandra grabbed her keys and drove through sheets of rain, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. She thought of Keanu and hoped he was already on his way. When she arrived, the hospital parking lot was nearly deserted, water pooling around the tires of the few cars there. Inside, the halls were dim, emergency lights casting long, eerie shadows. Voices of frightened children echoed faintly through the corridors. Sandra's heart pounded as she turned a corner and saw Keanu kneeling beside a group of kids, holding a flashlight under his chin and telling them a funny ghost story. Not to scare them, but to make them laugh. The children's nervous giggles cut through the tension like sunlight breaking through clouds. Then came a distant crash of thunder, followed by the sound of rushing water outside. A nurse ran past, saying part of the lower floor was taking on water. Without waiting, Keanu stood and headed toward the stairwell. Sandra followed. Downstairs, water seeped under a set of double doors, creeping across the tiles. A frightened maintenance worker struggled to move sandbags alone. Keanu joined him, lifting and stacking bags with quiet efficiency. Sandra rolled up her sleeves and joined, too. Together, they pushed back the water, their clothes soaked and cold, but neither complained. Suddenly, a shout echoed down the hall. A child had wandered off, searching for her missing stuffed animal. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the hallway for a brief second. Sandra's heart lurched. She and Keanu split up to search. She moved quickly through the darkened corridors, calling softly. "Emma, where are you?" The silence was suffocating, broken only by distant thunder. She turned a corner and saw a small figure crouched by a window, crying softly. Before she could step forward, a crack of thunder boomed, and the child flinched, pressing herself against the glass. Sandra crouched low, speaking gently. "Hey, sweetheart, I'm here. Let's get you somewhere safe." The girl hesitated, then ran into her arms. As they made their way back, Sandra spotted something surprising outside. Through the rain-streaked glass, she could see Keanu standing ankle-deep in water in the courtyard. He was lifting boxes of medical supplies onto a higher platform, his hair plastered to his face by the storm. No one had told him to do it. No cameras were rolling. But he did it anyway, quietly saving what mattered most. When they regrouped upstairs, the power flickered and then failed completely, plunging the hall into darkness. The children began to cry again. Keanu found a small piano in the waiting area, its keys barely visible in the emergency light. He began to play a gentle melody, soft, steady, almost like a lullaby. The notes floated through the corridors, calming the frightened voices. Sandra stood nearby, holding the little girl, and felt tears prick her eyes. There was something about that moment. The rain outside, the melody in the dark, the way Keanu's quiet presence steadied everyone, that felt almost sacred. Minutes stretched into an hour. Finally, backup generators kicked in, bringing dim lights back to life. The storm outside began to ease, but the mood in the hospital remained fragile. Sandra helped distribute blankets to the children, her heart still racing from the adrenaline. When she found Keanu again, he was standing by a window, his shirt clinging to his shoulders, watching the rain lighten into a drizzle. He looked tired but calm, as if storms no longer surprised him. "You didn't have to do all that," she said quietly. Keanu turned, his expression soft. "I did," he replied, "because storms aren't just weather. They're tests, and kindness is the only thing that holds in the wind." His words hung in the air like the fading rain. Before they left the hospital, Maya approached with a grateful smile. "The kids will remember this night," she said. "Not the storm, but how they felt safe because of you two." Keanu shook his head gently. "They'll remember the light in themselves," he said. "We just reminded them it was there." Outside, the city was wet and glistening under the streetlights. Puddles reflected neon signs and passing headlights like small mirrors. Sandra and Keanu walked side by side to their cars. She felt a quiet admiration building into something deeper. Not the kind of admiration for a co-star or a friend, but for a human being who chose humility over recognition again and again. She stole a glance at him, catching that same quiet look, the one that had silenced a gala, steadied a boy, and now calmed a storm. It sent a shiver through her despite the lingering warmth of the night air. As she drove home, Sandra realized the storm had done more than flood streets and darken halls. It had washed something clean inside her, a reminder that the world still held small miracles, waiting quietly in the rain. She couldn't shake the feeling that bigger things were yet to unfold, and that Keanu's quiet acts were only the beginning of a change far larger than either of them could see. The storm had ended, but the story was far from over. The night of the open doors, a week after the storm, the city felt calmer. Sunshine spilled across the streets, and the sky was a wide, forgiving blue. Yet for Sandra Bullock, a quiet tension lingered in her chest. Like the feeling before a final scene in a movie, when you know something important is about to happen. She had spent the last few days thinking about everything Keanu had shown her. The janitor's pride restored, the frightened boy in the elevator, Samuel's stars, the storm at the hospital. All these moments felt like stepping stones leading somewhere bigger. That evening, Sandra received a simple text from Keanu. "Come to the hospital's West Wing tonight. Bring no one, just your heart." She didn't hesitate. She drove through the city as dusk painted the skyline in pink and orange hues. The hospital looked peaceful now, its lights glowing warmly against the darkening sky. As she walked through the familiar hallways, memories of laughter and fear from the storm flickered around her. When she reached the West Wing, she stopped. Something new had been added. The once empty corridor was now lined with paper stars, drawings, and handwritten notes from the children. The room Samuel had filled with his art had grown beyond its walls. Volunteers, nurses, and even maintenance workers had opened their doors to display the kids' messages. "Thank you for saving my drawing. Kindness feels like sunlight. Storms don't win when we stand together." The hallway glowed under soft string lights, and for a moment Sandra felt the world pause. Keanu stood at the end of the hall, speaking quietly to a small group of children and their families. He wasn't giving a speech or posing for photos. He was listening, like always. When he noticed Sandra, his face softened into that familiar, quiet smile. He walked toward her, stopping just close enough for his words to be only theirs. "They wanted to open the doors tonight," he said, "to show the city what small acts can build." As they walked together through the transformed corridor, people shared stories. A father who had once lost hope but found strength after a kind word from a stranger. A young nurse inspired to start a community art program. A teenager who decided to study medicine because she remembered the night of the storm. Sandra listened, overwhelmed. She realized these weren't stories about Keanu. They were stories about the ripple effect he'd set in motion. Proof that one quiet look, one gentle action, could echo endlessly. Midway down the hall, Maya approached holding a small wooden box. "This belonged to Samuel," she said. "Inside is a note he wrote before he passed. He asked that it be read when the stars finally filled more than one room." She opened the box and handed the folded paper to Keanu. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded it. The note was written in a child's uneven handwriting. "Dear future people, if you are reading this, it means someone kept their promise. Thank you for showing the world that quiet kindness is stronger than storms." A hush fell over the hall. Sandra felt tears streaming down her cheeks, and when she looked at Keanu, his eyes glistened too. He cleared his throat but didn't try to speak. Instead, he reached out and took her hand. It wasn't a grand gesture, it was small, gentle, and steady. And yet, in that touch, Sandra felt the weight of all the quiet promises kept, all the storms weathered, all the unseen acts of grace. Outside, a sudden breeze rustled the trees, carrying the faint sound of children laughing in another wing of the hospital. Sandra and Keanu stepped out into the cool night air. The city stretched out before them, alive and indifferent, but tonight it seemed just a little softer. Sandra turned to him. "You've changed me," she whispered. Keanu shook his head slightly. "You changed yourself," he replied. "All I did was remind you." As they walked toward the parking lot, a nurse called out behind them. "Wait, before you go." She handed them a paper star, drawn by one of the youngest patients. On it, in crayon, were the words, "Quiet heroes make the world louder with hope." Sandra traced the letters with her fingers, her heart full. They paused by their cars, not wanting the night to end. Keanu looked at her with that same quiet look, the one that had silenced a gala, saved a child, and steadied a hospital through a storm. It wasn't just a look anymore. It was a promise, a reminder, a living star. Sandra smiled through her tears. "I'll carry this night forever," she said softly. Keanu's smile deepened, small but sure. "That's all the world needs," he said, "for someone to carry it forward." As they drove away in separate directions, the city lights twinkled like Samuel's paper stars. Somewhere a child held a sketchbook. A janitor walked a little taller, and a stranger prepared to give quietly. The world hadn't changed overnight, but because of a quiet look, a boy's dream, and two hearts willing to listen, it had shifted. Just enough.